even after we account for job-related factors and educational differences and a range of other things, we still only find that 27% of the pay gap for Pacific males compared to European males can be explained, and only 39% of the pay gap for Pacific females can be explained.
Well, thank you, Gail, for being here, and thank you for the piece of work. So can we just begin with, how did you measure the pay gap?
Well, to understand ethnic pay gaps in New Zealand, we compare average hourly earnings from an individual's main job between Māori, Pacific and Asians compared to Europeans. We can't look at other ethnic groups because there isn't enough data to enable that. We find when we compare Pacific males to European males, the ratio is 76% in terms of hourly pay, and for Pacific women, the ratio is 85%.
So there's a huge portion of the gap that can't be explained for Pacific men and Pacific women. Why?
Well, we use survey data and statistical analysis to see, are there any factors that can help explain the pay gap? And using data from Stats New Zealand, we can account for a wide range of characteristics, individual characteristics, household and job-related factors.
So I often hear people talk about occupational choice and education as being, contributors. But how much do those factors contribute to the gap, and what else contributes to the gap?
Well, we find regardless of which gender we're looking at, whether we're looking at males or females, job-related factors go some way to explaining the gap. And for females, we find educational differences also play a role. But what's really important is that even after we account for job-related factors and educational differences and a range of other things, we still only find that 27% of the pay gap for Pacific males compared to European males can be explained, and only 39% of the pay gap for Pacific females can be explained.
So what does this mean?
Well, there's several reasons behind the pay gap part that cannot be explained. This includes there may be things that is not in the data, such as differences in preferences for non-wage components of the job. There may also be unconscious bias, and of course there could be discrimination in the labour market.
So we've known for some time that Pacific people have earned the least, especially in the public sector, over 10 years. So how urgent do you think we need to address this problem?
I think the pay gaps between Pacific and Māori in particular relative to Europeans is a really urgent issue, because by 2030 and beyond, these groups are going to be a much larger part of our workforce.
So we recognize it as an investment in our economy. This is not just about Pacific people.
An investment for the future of the country.
Future. Based on what we know, to date, how can the Pacific pay gap be addressed?
Income disparities for Pacific workers relative to Europeans has real consequences for Pacific workers and their families, and for future generations. And we know from this research that we need to do more to bridge the educational divide, and we also need to provide more pathways to higher occupations for Pacific workers. We also know from other research that there is discrimination that's prevalent in the labour market, and this is a clear breach of human rights. Ensuring fair opportunities for all will help reduce the pay gap, and it will also encourage more inclusive and diverse workplaces where people and individuals can unlock their full potential.